Welcome to Unbroken Arrows, and today I have a special guest by the name of Jason Durham. And Jason has been a guest on a radio program that I listen to quite often, and people that have listened to our podcast know that Fan Outdoors from its broadcast off of KFAN out of the Twin Cities. Longtime listener and really enjoy the program, but Jason caught my interest when I first heard that he lives in the Park Rapids area. And again, listeners to the podcast know that I have my family has a cabin in the Park Rapids area on Little Mantrap Lake. So, and Jason is a teacher, but he's also a guide, and his guide service is Go Fish Guide Service. So, Jason, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me on here. You know, we were talking about Nebraska earlier, and you wouldn't believe how many people from Nebraska visit here or have cabins here. It's unbelievable. We love all of the Nebraska residents that come to visit.
Well, it is, you're right. I know a lot of people. I've run into a lot of people, you know, and I live now in Sioux Falls, but all of my teaching career was in Nebraska and grew up, born and raised there. And it's amazing. There were some of the things that you'll find, or you'll run into people like a T-shirt. I'm sure you do, recall Wimpy's Cafe in downtown Park Rapids?
Oh my gosh, yes.
You know, there's a guy that had a T-shirt, you know, on with that on it. It's like, so, you know, how do you know Wimpy's? Oh, my family's been going up to the Park Rapids area, you know, my whole life. And, you know, stories like that. I can't now, what's is it the Royal Bar?
Oh yeah, the Royal Bar, possibly the world's best
right, possibly. And I saw somebody at Walmart with that jacket on in Nebraska, and it's like, okay, there's got to be a story. You know, what do you hear? Well, their daughter, who they lived in the Park Rapids area, their daughter married somebody from Nebraska, so they were down visiting.
I tell people all the time, wear a shirt that says Park Rapids on it anywhere in the world, and somebody will approach you. And I'm not kidding.
Yeah, I can believe it.
You can be in another country, and somebody will approach you and go, oh, hey, I've been there. So, yeah, it's world known.
And, you know, sidebar story here. I'm 61, and I think my first trip to the cabin was when I was 5. So let's do the math. What's that, 56 years? I've been going up there 56 years. And just, let's see, a week ago Friday was the first time that I ever traveled through, saw the cabin, went through Park Rapids in the wintertime. My father-in-law and some of his friends went ice fishing up on Lake of the Woods. And so they had a couple of guys cancel, and I was fortunate enough to be able to have the time to go, and had a great time. But then I started twisting people's arms as like, you know, would you mind driving back through Bemidji? And so I could see the place, and, you know, it was cool. Well, literally, it was cool. Yeah. But you know, to see the cabin, to see the place that I've been to, you know, only between May and October, to see a lot of snow on the ground and the lake frozen, and a few of those ice shacks out there. It was really fun. It was a cool experience for me.
It's a different world, that's for sure. It's not the hustle and bustle of summer. I mean, summer, it gets really, I don't want to say really busy, because in all honesty, it doesn't. Mm-hmm. If you compare this to like the Brainerd Lakes area, Alexandria area, it is not busy at all. I mean, even from the lake perspective, there's so many mornings I go out on trips and I don't even see another boat until 9 o'clock. And you might only have a couple other boats on the lake. So if you want a great place to vacation that is quiet, this is the place to go.
Well, and there are, a few lakes to choose from, right? You know, they say the land of 10,000 lakes, but I think there's probably more than that. But there are quality lakes, quality resorts in and around that whole area.
It would be 90 lakes within a 10-mile radius and around 400 within 25 miles.
You are kidding me.
And that's including Leech Lake, the third largest lake in Minnesota. So yeah, there's a ton of opportunity here. Whether you like to, it doesn't matter. If you like the outdoors, it's all outdoors.
Well, and in the recent years, I purchased a side by side, and you know, I'd say maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and now that type of recreation is new to me, but I can't believe what it's opened up in terms of enjoying that particular area. With I think it's the Forest Riders ATV club
Yes.
that maintains and takes care of the trails, both I think for snowmobilers and for the ATVs. I've seen things and been in areas that I never knew existed. And so it's opened up a whole new opportunity, a whole new door in terms of enjoyment up in that area.
That's awesome. And that's why people come here, because there is a lot to see. And there are areas that I haven't seen.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I got a message yesterday. A guy who booked a guide trip on Long Lake for June, and I pick people right up at their dock if they live on the lake. And so I asked for his address, and when I looked where the dock was located, I realized I've never been in that bay. I've never been all the way to the back of this bay. And so I'm excited for this trip just to drive up to his dock, even though we're not going to fish in that bay. But it'll be houses that I haven't really seen, and Long is not that big of a lake, but that's just an area I don't travel to. I have no reason to go in there. So this will be unique.
Well, that was actually one of the questions that I have for you, and maybe I'll start with that. But your vocation, you are a professional educator, and your avocation, I guess, would be guiding then. But when you are, and we'll talk a little bit more about your teaching and your career in professional education, but as a guide, when you have an opportunity to guide on a new lake or an area that you haven't or you're not familiar with, what do you do to prepare for that particular area that you're not familiar with?
Well, I'll be honest. Typically, I'm not guiding in those situations. I'm usually just exploring on my own. I mean, I have in the past had trips where I've been on a lake that I've never been to before. But that was definitely early in my career when I was probably in my teens and early 20s. And, in those situations, it depends on what you're fishing, but simplistically, fish just like to be around things.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that's different, anything that sets itself apart, whether that's a stick that's protruding out of the water or a small patch of weeds or an old tire on the bottom of the lake, they are all attractive in some way to some species of fish. So you just have to find some of those things that stand out. And of course, you're not going to know where every railroad tie and tire from a dock is laying on the bottom of the lake if you've never been there before. But just using a map, you can look at the topography and figure out, here's where there's a quick drop off, or here's where there's a point that sticks out into the lake. Here's where there's a turn that goes inside along this drop. And so just looking at some of those areas that would be highways for fish. And I try to find areas that have multiple species that are regenerative, meaning we can catch fish out of an area and there's still going to be more fish that are coming into it. And you kind of have this rejuvenation of the area throughout the day or throughout the days. It doesn't always go like that. I mean, that's obviously the goal. But if you can find areas like that have multiple species, regenerative, usually they have access to deep water, those are the areas that stick out in my mind that I'm going to gravitate towards right away. But that map is the biggest thing. I mean, there's so many tools out there now. I wish they existed when I was a kid.
Oh, sure.
Because, man, the amount of information is just unbelievable. I used to wait, all month long until my copy of In Fisherman came. And you'd read it cover to cover. Mm-hmm. And then you'd read it cover to cover 3 more times. And then you'd put it on the shelf because you never threw them away because they were too valuable. Mm-hmm. Because that's the information that you had. So today, being able to go on YouTube, the internet, just put in anything that you want, any technique you want to learn, anything about fish behavior, man, it's available for you. And then the tools too that'll help you catch more fish. Like, for instance, any type of mapping program on your phone. There's several that are really great. I really like the One Boat Network through Humminbird because it's got the Lake Master maps for this area, which are the most accurate, at least at this point in time. And so that's handy to have on your phone, especially if you want to show a buddy where you caught a fish, or it always happens where you have somebody that's in your angling circle that you'd love to give them the opportunity to, find those fish that you caught today or yesterday or whenever and see if they're still there. So then you can just take a screenshot of, where your spot is on the lake, or you can actually share them so then they can find it easier. So there's a lot available for that. If you just, and everybody has their own, I guess, take on what is valuable in terms of like an app that you would have. I mean, there's some fishing apps that I wouldn't find valuable. Like I used to kind of write down what the day was like, what the conditions were like, what I caught, what I used, all of that stuff. And it was pretty comprehensive. Now you can get apps that'll help you with that you literally just have to, click buttons and they'll fill it in. But I don't use that information. I'm not using it. I'm using what's happening currently. Sometimes it gives me some ideas. It's really nice for just remembering, because it brings back a lot of memories when you journal like that. But I don't have an app like that I gravitate towards and enter all my fishing information. But for another angler, that might be highly valuable and interesting. So,
right.
Don't take what I say as gospel. Do what is right for you.
Right. What's your favorite species to pursue?
Yes. All of them. It doesn't matter. If it swims, it is fun to catch. I have changed my magnetism towards various species of fish throughout my lifetime. When I was a kid, the coolest fish out there was a bullhead. And, nobody wanted to catch a bullhead, but they're so cool. I mean, they got the whiskers and they just look bizarre, like some sea creature. So catching them, that was a unique experience, and I always loved that. But as I've grown, I've found, I guess, enjoyment, I would say, out of some of these fish that other people don't. I mean, even like take a 20-inch northern. Okay, everybody says it's a hammer handle, it's a snake, slime dart, whatever you want to call it. People kind of curse them out. But you know how many kids go bananas for a fish like that?
Right.
I mean, I remember the first northern that I ever caught. That was a milestone, as a guide. And I remind our younger guides about this all the time, that when somebody catches that fish, you don't know where that lands in their experience of fishing. So you have to play up every fish like it is their personal best, like it is their biggest, because the attitude that you have in the boat is going to be projected onto your clients too. If you're having a miserable time out there, they're going to have a miserable time too, no matter how good the fishing is. So the attitude has to be there first, and the fish will come. But celebrate northern pike.
Yeah, that evolution of catching fish, again, as a young man, would have a week off from work, go up and you wanted to fish, and get up early and fish until you couldn't anymore, and go eat lunch and maybe a little nap, and then go fish again. And it was all driven on just wanting to catch fish. And now, you know what? It's the process. It's not whether or not I catch fish. It's just being able to get in the boat, feel yourself on the waves. If you happen to get a strike, if you're trolling for northern, or if you're jigging for walleye, or if you're, my favorite, honestly, pound for pound, ounce for ounce, I love bluegill. And I love bluegill fishing, slip bobber fishing, and I love your answer. Yes. What's your favorite? Yes. But, I think that's, and I fished with people that, it's a horrible day if you don't catch your limit, or if you don't catch a big fish or anything else like that. And boy, maybe there was a point in time that I felt that way. I don't recall, but there isn't a wasted day on the water. There isn't a wasted day outdoors.
I 100% agree with that. And there was a mentor that I had years ago, Randy Ammenrud, who's Hall of Fame fisherman, and Man, he was a great guy to teach me some stuff about life and fishing and all of it. And one thing that he always said is, he said, I've never been skunked. He said, there's been plenty of days where I didn't catch a fish, but I've never been skunked because it's just all attitude. It's just like you can take something positive from any day, but you don't have to, when it is a bad day, you don't have to glorify it and say, oh, it was great because of this. You can just say, hey, we had kind of a rough day, but you know what? We're going to go back tomorrow and it's going to be even better.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I was talking to a friend the other day when you were talking about, kind of these stages, especially as a really young angler. But a friend of mine who works for the DNR, he was talking about the stages of an angler. And I found this so interesting. I don't know why people aren't talking about this more. Because think about this. Okay, you're a young kid and you get introduced to bluegills. I mean, that's the common way that people are introduced to catching fish. And so you're catching sunfish, perch, bass here and there, and you
Right.
get hooked, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now you want to go. And all of that time with family is fantastic. But then you get to the point where you get your driver's license or you get to use the boat by yourself. Either one doesn't matter because now you're in the exploratory phase. You want to go and see everything. You want to go to different lakes. You want to try different depths. You want to just see everything, right? And then after that, you get into the big fish stage. Now you want to catch trophies. Well, I should say before that, you get to the limit stage.
Right.
And that's where, you have these days of fishing that are pretty good. And find that you have one of those days where you catch a limit. I don't care what species of fish it is, but there's something about hitting that milestone as a young person that is a big deal. And after you go through that stage, you get to the big fish stage. And that's where you just want to find a trophy. Bigger the better. You want to beat your personal best every time you're out. And then after that, you get into the experimental stage. And this is where you're trying different techniques. You might use one technique and pluck a few bass out of a school, and then you go to a different school, even though there's fish waiting there. You go to a different one to see if you can fool those fish using the same technique. You might only use one technique the entire day just to get better at it, right?
Right.
And then after the experimental stage, you hit the stage where you're just happy to go. You're just happy to go out fishing, that the relationships become so important that you don't remember the fish anymore. I mean, you have those standouts, don't get me wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But when you look back and reflect upon your trips, the fish are definitely not the first thing that you remember.
That's exactly right. And I hope we get back to this because I think I'll circle back to my ice fishing trip with a story. But if we could shift gears here, Jason, I want to talk a little bit about your career in education. I know that as a retired professional educator, I can't tell you how rewarding that profession was for me, but there were so many rewarding interactions, relationships, friendships, coaching, teaching then later on as an administrator, working with students and families and my whole entire career. They talk about you find the right profession, you don't feel like you're going to work. And don't get me
Exactly.
wrong. There are tough days, tough times, and those tough days in the profession. But bottom line is working with the kids, developing those relationships was something that was so very rewarding. And a month or so ago, you were a guest on the Fan Outdoors, and you started talking about that. And I thought, I would really like to have a conversation with Jason about this because whether it's professional in your career, your advocate or your vocation, like as in teaching, or in your avocation, like your guiding, relationships, that's what it's all about. Am
For
I making
sure.
am I
I
making a
mean,
wrong statement?
no, you're absolutely right. I think some people think as a fishing guide that I have people that come up here and they fish with me one time and they take their fish home, and then another group comes in and they take their fish home. First off, not as many people keep fish as you think. It's far less than you'd ever imagine. And as a fishing guide, you know how often we're reaching that milestone of limits? Almost never, honestly, because most people don't want that much fish to deal with. Our limits in Minnesota are very liberal. And so if they're staying for the week, a lot of people don't want to, they want to have one fish meal and then go home. They don't want to freeze the fish. They're not as good. So for a lot of people, they're not keeping much. But what happens is I don't have clients that just funnel and circle through. I have clients that I have come back for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years. My longest client has been with me for over 30 years. I've had clients that have not been with me even half that time that have been out with me hundreds of times.
Wow.
And it's those people that's what really make the story. Those connections are what keep you close. Those connections are what provide stories, because the fish are fish, right? You can get a big one day and get blanked the next day, but those relationships, they stick with you. They're more consistent.
Right. Well, it's just like you said, when it comes to the end of the day, the memories, you might talk about the fish you caught or the one you lost or the ones you lost, but it's that interaction, what so-and-so said, that goofball or whatever the case is, but it's not necessarily about the fish, or if you're hunting, about the game that you harvested. It's about people. It's about those that you were with. I could go back, I could tell you the person who was the major influence and why I became a teacher. Charles Kutra, my high school English teacher, junior high basketball coach, high school football coach. Diane Caldwell was an assistant principal at Omaha Burke High School. When I was teaching there, she was the kind of principal I wanted to become. She was my influence. Those are the kinds of people that influence us. They don't even try, but they do, and they have the major impact. Do you have people like that in your life?
Oh man, I mean, so many. You talk about, this is a small community, and so I live in Park Rapids, but I grew up in the metropolis of Nevis. And for listeners, I know there's plenty of people that know where that's at. Population 360. That's people, not 1,000. And I grew up in this small community, and that's actually where I teach. When I teach kindergarten, my classroom's 2 blocks from my childhood home. So this is deeply ingrained in me. Like, this school is such a huge part of my life. Talk about relationships. There's one right there. Just my relationship with the community and the school. Mm-hmm. But in terms of like going into teaching, I'll be honest, I had lots of people that I looked up to who were educators. In fact, a lot of them. But I hadn't planned to go into education. I was going to be in medicine. I was going to be an occupational therapist. I was trying to figure out how to make my guide business work with being an OT, because I started my guide business at 15. That was far before I knew what I was going to do as a career in life. So when I was in the OT program, I had to do a pile of volunteer work, over 100 hours of volunteer work in that profession. And I realized I didn't like it. I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life. When you were talking about, when you find the right profession, it doesn't feel like it's work. That's 100% true. In fact, in my kindergarten classroom, we talk a lot about that word work, because as a society, we've put a negative connotation behind it.
Right.
When in reality, work can be incredibly enjoyable. So it's somewhat programming the kids too that,
well, it gives you value
and be fun. It gives you value, right?
Yeah, I mean that's very important.
But in terms of someone guiding me down the road for education, maybe it was the girl I was dating in college that just said, maybe you should try teaching. It might have been that.
Well,
but I will say this: a lot of the people that I'm really close with, that have had big impacts on my life, a lot of them have been teachers. And maybe it's just because the way that most teachers are made up, and just with their caring and kindness, motivation, all of that is so important. And I think about, like, when I was a kid, how adults they'd hype you up. You had a hype guy, right?
Right.
Every adult was your hype guy. And they'd come up and they'd tell you compliments, and they'd give you reassurance, and they'd tell you that you could do something, even if you thought you couldn't. But as adults, we don't always have that. We don't always have the hype guy that's with us that goes, hey, you can do this. Hey, you got this. So if I was going to give you some advice, find a friend who is a hype guy, who is just the kindest person, who lifts you up, but you do the same for them. And that's the relationship part. It's symbiotic, and it should be.
Wise words. Wise words.
I'll elaborate on that a little bit too, that, out of the people that were influential to me, not just with teaching, but I'm going to just say with life, a lot of that initially connected through fishing, because I had plenty of mentors that would take me out fishing now and again. Maybe it would be a buddy's dad that, we were just spending the day together, or a neighbor down the street that just knew I liked to fish. And, hey, I'm going to go to this lake. You don't usually fish that lake. I'd love to take you there. As adults, we need to remember that we had people to do that, and we need to become that person too. We need to do that for youth. We need to be that neighbor that says, hey, I got an empty seat. Come and fish. But I think about just like the overall compassion, I would say, that some of these mentors have had. And one that I would bring up is his name is Gary. And Gary's a really great friend, and really a hugely influential person on hundreds of thousands of people. He was our art teacher in school. He was also a coach for just about everything you could imagine. And he did a lot of other things too. I mean, just this last year, he wrote a book, and he used about every medium of art you could imagine, and was so talented with all of it. And Gary was just the kindest man you could ever meet. This is a guy that, he and his wife are teachers. And teachers don't get paid an exorbitant amount. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't believe how many teachers, and you know this, but our listeners might not know, how many teachers, even though they get paid garbage, donate their money back to the school or back to the kids, whether you're buying snacks for your classroom so those kids can have something when they're hungry, or you're buying a kid a new pair of shoes because their family can't afford it. That's what Gary was. He was always doing stuff like that, but you'd never know it because he'd never say anything.
Right.
He wouldn't want to take any credit for that. He would just want to do it because that's the right thing to do. I'm sure you've seen this in your career too.
Absolutely. And the times when you can make that connection with your students. I think of one time in Omaha when we were trying to discuss, just within our homeroom, trying to discuss, maybe something that we could do as a volunteer project. And somebody came up with, it was fall leading into winter, and somebody in the homeroom said, we just happened to go through our closet, and we've got like 4 or 5 coats that we're going to take to Goodwill. How about we do a coat drive, just a coat drive? And, we talked it over, and, I got it approved by administration. And so we made it a challenge, a homeroom challenge within the school. Jason, you wouldn't believe the number of coats that we collected. And then all of a sudden, I found out that I won't go into names, but the powers that be contacted the television stations and the radio stations, and they wanted this to be publicity. And I told this to my homeroom, and they said, no, that's not why we did it. And right. I couldn't have been more proud of them. And so the kids were able to say, this is why we did it. We didn't do it for publicity. We didn't do it for any other reason. But there's going to be an availability of something that we did to help somebody else.
As an educator, I mean, man, when you see kids do that and they take the lead like that
Yeah.
and do responsible adult things, it's mind blowing. You were talking about like some of the things we get to see as educators, and I always sometimes feel bad because as a kindergarten teacher, I get to see a lot of milestones. I get to see a lot of firsts that the
Right.
parents don't.
Mm-hmm.
I wish they could. You know how many kids I've witnessed lose their first tooth?
Sure.
That's a milestone, and the parent doesn't even get to see it. Or I have a kid that is really struggling with speech, for instance, and all of a sudden they come up to me and they just out of nowhere use a full sentence.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. So, any of those little things, they mean a lot when you see a kid that it clicks.
But I'm also going to tell you, Jason, that even in our profession, there are folks that don't take the time to recognize that in the classroom. So
True.
my hats off to you for making that a priority, to make your students feel special, to make and help them understand that it is special, that it is important. In coaching, I coach basketball, and one of my favorite sayings is, do the right thing because there are people watching all the time. And, some kids kind of get it, others not really. And I had this idea leading into a pep rally before a big game. And I worked with it was a fourth grade teacher at the time, and she was a former volleyball coach. And I worked with them, and I asked them if they would take the time to, if they had either a girls basketball player, a boys basketball player, or a wrestler, because those were the three sports going on at that time, and, have them, writing, reading, writing, and math scores are all very important things, and we could use it as a writing prompt, And if you could say something to somebody that's on one of those teams, what would you say? And you wouldn't believe, I wish I could have read every one of them, but I took a sampling of them for the girls basketball team and the wrestlers and the boys basketball team. And at that pep rally, I just went into my spiel about, hey, thanks for your support and everything. And we hope to play well today, but here's what I really want to talk about. And I want to talk about specifically you high schoolers, how, people are always watching. And sometimes you hear me say that and maybe you don't believe it. And then I would call out a student, a wrestler, and then call up the fourth grader that wrote it and have them stand next to each other. And then I read what they wrote. And you wouldn't believe the tears that were flowing, the hugs that were going on, and the kids, I never knew. I never knew that this little guy thought about me that way, or that's the only reason they come to the wrestling meet is to watch me wrestle. And the girls the same way, and the boys. And I think if you help the young people make those types of connections and understanding, they're going to be more observant and aware of how they can impact others, sometimes without even trying.
Absolutely. In our school, we're K through 12, and it's both a blessing and a curse.
Right.
I like to think of it as more of a blessing. And for me, it's cool because I know every kid in our school. And even if they weren't in my classroom, I know every kid in the school. We have about 600 kids. And the youngsters, they look up to those older kids, just as idols. And I remember being that age. I remember so much from a very young age.
Right.
I remember being in kindergarten, and I knew every person that was in the high school. Like I just looked up to them so much. Oh, this is so and so. And you'd look in the yearbook and you'd see who they were. And a lot of those people now, they're friends. as adults. But that mentor, being a mentor, I don't think people who are mentors realize how incredibly important they actually are, and having an impact with such little things that they don't even realize. It can be such a small act of kindness. I mean, literally just for some little kids, having an older kid say hi to them is huge. And remember, in kindergarten, they've only been alive for 5-6 years.
Right.
So if you take if you take their experiences,
Right, their range
they're
of experience.
very limited.
Right.
Incredibly limited. So as adults, I mean, things that we think are really little things are huge for a kindergartner because they've never had it happen before.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of have to keep that in mind. But I love our school with that K through 12 format, and I love how those older kids really help out and help form these younger kids too.
Well, the last couple of days, I've had the privilege of talking with my mom on the phone. My mom just turned 97, and she's doing well, and we get to talk on the phone and 2 hours away, so you get to drive and visit every once in a while. But she's a storyteller. She comes from a family of storytellers, so any phone conversation isn't usually a brief conversation. But invariably, there are times where, we'll get off the phone and she'll call me the next day and, I meant to tell you this. Well, that's what happened yesterday. We talked the day before and she called me back and she said, there's something I forgot to tell you. And it was the fact that one of the people that live across the hall from her son-in-law and daughter came to visit, and this woman's son-in-law and I were good friends in high school. And mom talked about having a nice conversation with the fact that he was telling her things that we did that she wasn't aware of course, but we had a love of music. We played guitars and we did that a lot. And then she also remembered that she wanted to tell me that there was a gentleman from a nearby town that had passed away, and his funeral was going to be coming up. And I'm reminded of this because he was one of those people that he wasn't a teacher, but he was a coach, a mentor, and he taught I don't know how many kids the art of boxing. And through that, he impacted so many people. And one of the things that I recall from listening to you on KFan or Fan Outdoors a few weeks ago was a story that you told about a gentleman that was diagnosed with cancer. Would you share that story with our listeners, Jason?
Yeah, so I kind of brought him up a little bit, Gary. That's the teacher that, man, I mean, if you just want to look at somebody as a whole and like the model person, that was Gary. And yeah, Gary was diagnosed with cancer on Thanksgiving. And I actually spoke at his funeral 2 days ago.
Mm-hmm. Sorry for your loss, Jason.
Thank you. It wasn't just a loss for me. It was a loss for our entire community, for sure. Mm-hmm. He was an incredibly influential man, probably the most influential person who's ever come through our town. And it was hard. It was really hard. And his son called me, and I've been close with the family my whole life, and he called and he said, "Hey, if you'd like to say a few things at the funeral, that'd be really nice." And my first response was, "No, there's no way. I can't do this. It's too close. It's too personal. I couldn't hold myself together." And there was another man, a friend of mine, who was going to be giving the eulogy. By the way, there's a great TED Talk on YouTube that's titled, "If you ever get asked to do a eulogy, accept it.
Hmm.
Well, I told Gary's son that I would think about it, that I was going to meet with the man who was giving the eulogy in a couple days, and I'd kind of evaluate things from there. So I met with the man, and the conversation was good. And afterwards, I messaged my friend, and I said, hey, he's going to do an amazing job. An amazing job. But if you meet with him and you feel like maybe it's going to be too formal, not personal enough, not even not personal enough, not that, but just from a different perspective, maybe. And I told Eric that if he felt like I still needed to go up there, that I could do that. And as the days leading up to Eric meeting with the man giving the eulogy, I was kind of waiting for a sign, honestly. I was waiting for something to happen.
Sure.
This was over a weekend, and I kept waiting, like, something's going to appear that's going to make, oh my gosh, yep, I definitely need to do it or not. And I was at home that night, and remember, Gary's a great artist, incredibly accomplished artist. And I woke up one morning and it hit me instantly. Like, everybody knows that an artist, their worth, especially of their work, increases exponentially after they leave the earth. Primarily because there's no more that can be created.
Right.
Well, I have several works of art from Gary. I have paintings. One of my favorite paintings is a watercolor that he threw in the garbage in high school. And I took it out. My mom framed it when I was in college. I have it hanging on my wall. When Gary was over at my house one day, he goes, oh, wow, this is great. Who painted that? I said, you did. I took it out of the garbage. No. And I showed him. His signature was even on it. Uh-huh. Well, anyway. Sorry, I went off on a little bit of a tangent there. But anyway, I woke up and I realized how much more valuable those works of art were to me. Right. How important they were. Well, there's a problem. And that is, two friends of mine, opened up a restaurant several years ago in Nevis, the Iron Horse, great place to go. And they needed some decor. Well, being up in the Northwoods, everything's got to be Northwoodsy, right?
Right.
So I was in between stages of life. I'd gone through a divorce. I had a lot of stuff in boxes. And I gave them some of the decor. And two of the pieces were Gary's. In fact, one was a carved northern pike that's 36 inches long. And one is a trout, a brook trout that's beautiful. And that's 4 feet long. It's huge. And it was hanging in the bathroom of the restaurant. The pike was hanging from the ceiling with a fishing spear next to it. Very cool.
That's awesome.
Well, I woke up in this panic that I need to go get those. I need to go get those like right now. And as I'm in this high anxiety state, I realize I'm standing in front of the shelf, and I look at the shelf, and there's another piece of art on the shelf. It's a small carved fish, smaller than that 36-inch northern pike. It's a foot long. And it's a northern pike, and it has a paint job that is very unique. Gary's son carved that decoy and painted it. Well, he had help from his dad. But Gary's son, Jason, physically wasn't able to do it. Jason was in a wheelchair, and a great friend of mine. And Jason passed away. I was a pallbearer at his funeral. Well, I see this fish, and all at once, it hits me. I've got this backwards. I'm wanting to go and retrieve these works of art to hold them close. An artist doesn't create their work to be hoarded and kept captive and away from the eyes of the public. Art is to be seen.
Seen and shared. So
instead of going and retrieving the art, I brought Jason's decoy to the Iron Horse so it could hang up with his dad's because that's where it belongs.
That's an awesome story, Jason. That's very special. And to be able to do that, and as you say, art is meant to be shared, and that's the artist's, from the artist's point of view. Yeah, we can be kind of selfish about that if we wanted to be, but it's similar. Sure. I don't want to digress on your story here because I was going to go a different direction with a work of art that my daughter had done for me. But please continue on with your story of Gary.
Well, when I realized that was the right thing to do, I just started laughing. I just started laughing uncontrollably, like, I get it. I finally get it. And I could hear Gary laughing with me. And I'm going to tell you this, Greg, I am not, okay, I'm spiritual, I'm religious. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in a lot, even though I say, I was looking for a sign.
Right.
But I don't go too deep into that. But I do believe that there's a higher power for sure. And I believe in God. Well, Gary was laughing with me. And I had a conversation with him. And I just said, we kind of laughed. And I said, Gary, if you want me to speak at your service, you got to ask. You got to have your son ask. And the next day, Eric called. And he said, I talked to my mom and my sister, and we'd like you to say a few things. And I said, okay.
No hesitation.
I didn't know how I was going to, no hesitation. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason, too, was, over that time that I was kind of in limbo waiting for a sign, I brought it up to a few people because I thought maybe they would give me the sign, right? Mm-hmm. I told a few friends, and I said, man, I don't think I could do it. And they agreed. You're right. Yeah, that would be too hard. Yeah, you could never do that. And then I mentioned it to my sister. And her response was, don't you think Gary would want you to try? Well, Greg, as an educator, tell me this. If you had a student, a former student, or let's even expand further, a family member or a friend, if they were faced with an obstacle in life, if they were at a fork in the road, had to make an important decision, or if they were presented with a major opportunity, that in those situations, wouldn't you just want them to try?
Especially when you're thinking you can't. How many times has somebody, an adult, a teacher, someone in your life said, yeah, you might not be able to, but let's give it a try and I'll check back with you?
There were so many people that in my life said, you can do it. You can do this. I mean, there's plenty of people. There were times when I didn't think I could do something because I didn't think I was allowed to. When I became a fishing guide, I was just 15 years old. I didn't think I was allowed to become a fishing guide. I thought there was some process or you went up in front of a crowd and they said, I proclaim that this person is now a fishing guide.
Right.
There was nothing like that. There was a guy that came into the bait shop and said, hey, will you guide me? And all of a sudden, people started saying, hey, you can do this.
Yep, but a whole new world was opened up to you.
Not only you could do this, you should do this. Mm-hmm. I'll never forget the first guide boat I had was a 14-foot long with a 35-horse motor. Over the years, I replaced everything on it, but it was 14 feet. And the one thing I couldn't change was the size of the boat. So when I was in college, I actually found a boat for sale in the Minneapolis Star Tribune, because that's where you found used boats at that time. And I found one that I wanted to buy that was bigger. And I went to my parents and I said, hey, I found this boat for sale and here's how I intend to pay for it. And I fully expected my mom to say, You know, you're still in college. Finish college first and then start thinking about something like that. And instead, she said, I think that's a good idea. And my dad said, I think you should take our family boat and sell it and put that towards your guide boat. That's the port. That's what I needed.
Mm-hmm.
When my sister said, don't you think he'd want you to try? It wasn't even a question at that point.
Right.
Because I thought about everybody in my life. Like if they were given an opportunity or had a challenge or anything like that, if they just tried, they'd know that they could do it. In my kindergarten classroom, drawing is a big thing. We're starting to learn how to write sentences, and doing the illustrations is important. But kindergartners automatically go to, I can't do it. I can't draw. I've never drawn an elephant before. I don't know how to do it. And I always tell them, if you try your best, it's the best. And that's true. That's true with anything in life. If you try your best, if you give it your best effort and not try to self-sabotage yourself and say, no, I can't do it. But if you give truly your best, it is going to be the best.
Life in a microcosm happens in a classroom on a daily basis. And what you just described, whether it was your sister reminding you that your teacher wanted you to give it a try, or whether it's you guiding and giving confidence, because I'm sure there are people that are on fishing trips that have little or no experience fishing before.
Certainly. In fact, a lot of people will come on board and apologize right away. And they'll say, well, some people have never held a rod and reel before.
Mm-hmm.
And some people get on the boat and they self-sabotage and they go, oh, you know what? I'm just going to tell you, every time I'm on a fishing trip, it doesn't go well. Don't catch any fish. And you know what? It's pretty common that person doesn't catch much for fish because they're not invested in it. They're really not wanting to.
Right. They're setting the stage for failure.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. But if you get in the boat and you go, hey, I'm interested in learning more about fishing. Oh my gosh. I'm going to talk the entire time. I'm going to show you a million things. I'm still going to do that if you tell me you're not going to catch a fish, because now I've got a challenge on my hands, and I'm certainly going to try my best to get you to catch a fish.
Well, Jason, I wish we had more time. To be honest, there's 101 different questions I'd like to ask and directions I'd like to go in a conversation with you, but I know your time is valuable, and we're pushing an hour here already, and I can't believe that. So I want to...
It goes so fast.
It does, and I enjoy the conversation, and hopefully if we can maintain communication, I would love to see if you would be available for a cup of coffee sometime in Park Rapids, or I'd like to go to the Iron Horse and meet you there and see some of the artwork displayed by Gary.
Absolutely. The only unfortunate thing, Greg, we can't have coffee at Wimpy's.
Yes, right.
Exist anymore.
Not anymore.
My dad used to take lunch there every day as a mailman, so Wimpy's is close to me.
You know, it's interesting. Your dad was a mailman. My dad was a postmaster. You and I were both teachers. Some of the experiences that you've shared are very similar to experiences I've shared. It's interesting how when you start a conversation with somebody that you don't even know, how many similarities there are between them.
Certainly, and it's been really nice. I'll tell you what, talking with you as a fellow educator, you get it. You understand.
Well, on the Unbroken Arrows podcast, we try to encourage others to go outside, to experience the outdoors in a way that has helped our families heal through some of the hardships that have come along in our lives. But we have chosen to continue to move forward and to live life to the fullest that we can. And it sounds like if somebody would contact Go Fish Guide Service and spend time with you, I think they'd get a few more lessons than just fishing. lessons of life.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Jason, thank you for your time. Hopefully you could find time to be a guest again on the Unbroken Arrows podcast. I really enjoyed our conversation.
I would love to, Greg. I look forward to it.
Well, thank you, sir.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me on. Well, keep in touch, Greg.
Have a great rest of the school year, Jason, and continue success with your guide service. So,
Awesome. Thank you so much, Greg.
our immediate family has experienced cancer-related deaths as a result of leukemia, prostate, and ovarian cancer. And it would be safe to say that every one of us has had our lives impacted by cancer in some way. A healthy diet and exercise through outdoor activities has the potential to improve a person's physical and mental health. At any age, if you are active, stay active. And if you are not as active as you'd like to be, it's not too late to start now as a way to improve your health. If you or someone you know is thinking of suicide or is in need of crisis intervention, call the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988. You have to remember that the world is a better place with you in it. To all our listeners, take some time to get outside, enjoy the outdoors, and experience its healing powers. With that, on behalf of Catherine and me, until next time.